Okay, part two of one of the craziest crime stories I've ever read. Excuse the sound of the air conditioning next to me. It is an unusually warm day here in the Pacific Northwest, and there's just people wandering around my house, so I came outside. So what we were talking about was this true crime case that happened over the course of 27 years. I was telling you about how there was a murder in 1984 of Mario Vaccarino, who was the president of the local union for hospitality and restaurants, who was kind of a rabble-rouser, and he had been stirring up protests and trying to force unionization of restaurants and hotels down in Seattle. And it was not, oh, there it goes. It was not well received by some people. There was also rumors that perhaps he was getting ready to cooperate with a federal investigation out of Chicago, racketeering, possibly that there was, on the national level, the union they were using union dues for unsavory purposes, and that always just kind of connotes the mafia, right? And on top of that, at the murder scene of Mario Vaccarino, who was found floating dead face down in a bathtub with the water running, brutally beaten, he was sprinkled with Parmesan cheese, the implication being he was a rat. So that case goes unsolved for 27 years. It kind of comes back to the surface for some cold case investigators in 2011 who had been working on a case for 10 years of an East Side real estate agent named Mike Emmert, who had been murdered while showing a prospective home buyer a home in Woodinville, Washington in 2001. So just a little bit of backstory on that case. He was Realtor of the Year. He and his wife were partners. It's a very affluent area. He lived in Redmond, worked in Bellevue. The home that he was showing was in Woodinville, which is kind of our Napa Valley right now, although there's like the Chateau Saint Michelle wineries there, and that's super pretty. But most of the wineries in Woodinville are being run out of storage units and warehouses. Not super pretty. But anyways, so Woodinville is, as in the name, it's a wooded community. So there are larger neighborhoods where the properties are an acre or more. A lot of horse stuff, trails, things like that. They've kept it to be very wooded, nature friendly. And this particular home that Mike Emmert was showing to this prospective home buyer was in a neighborhood that had these homes that were kind of spread apart. Nice home. And Stephen, the man that was wanting to look at this home, had looked at it the day before. Mike had told his wife, hey, I'm meeting him in the parking lot of this local mall at 11:30, and then we're going to go look at the house again. That Stephen was in his 50s and that he had a limp and he walked with a cane. When the homeowner came home and discovered Mike Emmert's body in the bathroom with the water running both in the sinks and the shower, she also found a trail of blood, the 18 feet from where the murder had taken place all the way down to the bathroom. So detectives, after speaking with the wife and ruling her out, they were like, this looks like it's been staged to look like a robbery, but we don't think it's a robbery. And it was, he was stabbed 19 times and dragged down the hall. So would someone with this kind of physical impediment have been able to do that? They suspected it was a ruse, and that in the cane was maybe a knife or sword, or like those sabers that they have, or whatever they call when they're doing not jousting, on guard, fencing. Anyways, something like that. And that he was hit on the head and then he was stabbed multiple times. So they're thinking this feels like a professional hit. They looked at the wife. They were able to rule the wife out. They did look at the rival realtors. They decided that was not a likely motive for this crime. And they couldn't find anything in this guy's background to indicate why somebody would want to have him murdered. And so the case goes cold for 10 years. And like I mentioned in the last video, there was one drop of blood in the car which had been taken from the scene. And when they found it, they were able to send that drop of blood off for DNA testing. They did believe that it was from the perpetrator because he got in the car. So this case goes cold. Detectives are working that case. So we've got a 27-year-old cold case, a 10-year-old cold case, and then they get a hit in 2011. And the hit that they get is as a result of something that happens in 2010. In 2010, a doctor in Kirkland, Washington, which is also another affluent community on the east side, further north on the shores of Lake Washington, he comes home at night. It's dark in March of 2010. His wife is inside. His 13-year-old child is inside. And as he gets out of his car, a man comes out of the shadows dressed all in black. I believe that he saw that he had a weapon with him, and something about the interaction made him believe that this wasn't a robbery attempt or just a home invasion, but that this man meant him actual harm. And so he started fighting back. And he was actually doing pretty well. He got the guy to the ground, was trying to keep his hands from reaching for the weapon in his pocket, and then suddenly out of the shadows comes another assailant, and he pistol whips him 3 times. Third time puts him out completely. At this point, the wife has become aware that there's something happening. I think they tried to there was like a boot print on the door where they tried to stomp open the door. They weren't able to get in. She deadbolted the door, called 911. I think that they may have heard sirens, so this is an area where police come quickly. Take that what you will. So the 2 guys take off. One goes into the wind, one grabs an aluminum boat on the shores of the lake and takes off across the lake in the dark, never to be seen or heard from until the fall of 2010, when his body floats to the surface. And at that point, he's identified as a former Seattle police officer named Gary Kruger. So Gary Kruger was, in the 1970s, he was a Vietnam veteran. He joined the Seattle Police Department. He had a reputation for being a bad cop. I found a couple of stories. There has to be more out there of things that he did to people, because I just don't believe that the brutality of these 2 incidents that I read about could possibly be the only ones. So in one incident, he shot someone while still sitting in his patrol car, out the window. You can't do that, right? And that did not get him fired. But what did get him nudged out of the Seattle Police Department was the beating of a man who had run a yellow light. Can you run a yellow light? I believe it was a yellow light traffic stop that turned into this terrible beating. This guy was beaten to within an inch of his life. I saw an interview with him. He is alive. He's okay. But it was pretty rough, right? So Gary Kruger is forced out in 1980 of the Seattle Police Department. For a brief period of time, he does go and be a realtor. So I was like, well, it doesn't talk anywhere about the fact that he briefly had a real estate career, and you have this 2001 murder of Mike Emmert, who's a realtor, and then there was one more murder that they eventually tied him to. His name was Attorney James Berry. He was a real estate attorney, and he was also killed in 1984, about 6 or 7 months prior to the murder of Mario Vaccarino. And there were a lot of things about that case that were very similar to the other cases, and so they were able to eventually tie Kruger to that murder as well. A mysterious client wanted to meet with him at night. The wife finds him at 3 a.m. He's been shot and stabbed. His office is ransacked, but nobody believed that it was, his wallet, watch, and jewelry were missing, but nobody believed that it was a robbery, and evidence supported that there were at least 2 killers in his office that night. So when the body of this former Seattle police officer, Gary Kruger, is found, they believe that he has an at-large helper somewhere.